Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. Of course, I am Constantine Martelli. I have GSP here with me. I will once again remind you that we are on alternative platforms as well, such as BitChute, and I'm still working on the Substack. My technological literacy and just being too busy to actually address any real time to it has prevented that from being up in full operation, but you can certainly find our episodes on BitChute as well. Both of the links will be down below for that. But we have quite a bit today. It's been about a week and a half since our last episode. First episode of November, so we're breaking that in. And on top of the midterms, on top of a lot of news out of Europe, just as of today, the day we're recording, November 9th, 2022, now this episode will premiere on November 10th, 2022 on YouTube, there is some major news out of Kherson that was at first speculated to be rumor, as many things are in this war, but then very quickly turned out to be much closer than the reality than one would think. Now, the situation is still developing, it still is very dynamic, but what little there is so far does not look good in the slightest, and I'll let you take over from here.
Yeah, well, I mean, this week I'm not going to get into like the small minor things that are happening all over the front. The war is characteristically different in the east. There was speculation that there were massive losses in Ugledar on the part of the Russians. From what I understand, the Russians are actually still pressing forward. They've not given that up. They've taken more ground around Donetsk, and they've occupied half of Marinka now. But and they've repelled all attacks everywhere else. But Kherson is another place where they've repelled attacks very successfully for a month at least, with massive losses. And then today we got the news. Now, there's been rumors that the Russians were going to abandon Kherson for weeks and weeks. But today it seems that it's confirmed that that is what they've done. First, we were told, by some sources, that they're evacuating citizens so that they're not harmed. And then we heard about back channel deals with Jake Sullivan. Jake Sullivan visited Zelensky in Kiev. Um, we'll get into speculations about this war overall, but I'll focus on the details. And then I think today around 10 or 11 o'clock Eastern time in North America, we got the news that the Russians are going to abandon not just Kherson, the city, but they're going to abandon everything west of the Dnieper River. And there was all kinds of cope about like this is going to save more men and material, blah 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 blah. I mean, don't fight a war then. um, the kind of defeats that have been going on for the Russians since the end of August till now, really, it's it's definitely demoralizing, not just the military, but it's demoralizing the public. Um, to get into the specifics, there are now going to be far more dangers to Crimea. Remember that within 2 years after the war started in 2014, the Ukrainians stopped water supply to Crimea. Well, that's back on the table now. The HIMARS can now reach Crimea. Some of the better artillery can now reach Crimea.
They're
You have to
also
wonder
digging
what.
trench lines and setting up defenses in Crimea as we speak.
Yeah, there is something really, really wrong that is happening. Um, Putin, like there's a very complex right now relationship, I think, between the Russian public and Putin that was already there before the war. Let me explain. When the war broke out in 2014, I think you have to look at the exhaustion that the the let's say the Russian public has been under, right? If you look at the last 100 years, I don't think there's been another country that has lost more people because
Maybe
of
Serbia.
no. I mean, even per capita.
Oh, even
Well,
per
Serbia
capita?
did lose a lot in the First World War, but
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. But I get what recent decades, past 100 years,
so
does paint
we're
a.
talking about
But
First World
yeah, go
War,
on.
Revolution, 5 year Civil War, then a failed attack on Poland, uh, World War II, Afghanistan, which actually didn't see that many dead, Chechnya, the 90s. So I would say that, like when I visited Russia, like nobody really wanted to talk about Donbass. And in a way, I found that kind of alarming. I found one girl that did, and I became good friends with her. But I didn't see the concern openly from anyone else. Granted, these were 20 something, 30 something year olds. Maybe they were thinking about their lives, their futures, and other pressing concerns. But they're not like it didn't happen, right? There was another friend of mine, Roman, that was concerned. He had friends that went and volunteered to fight, but it wasn't there. So, you know, Putin, in a way, his like everybody will talk about Russia should have gone in 2014, and for various reasons, including the one that I'm implying here, Russia was not prepared to go to war in 2014. The problem is after 8 years, they still were not prepared. Putin, I think, rather than lamenting what Russia could have achieved in 2014, what the focus should be on was how could Putin have prepared them for war in the 8 years from now till then? Somewhere along the way, maybe because look at the lack of preparedness here. They had a basic strategy to go and quickly get it resolved without getting into a war. That's why it's a special military operation and no more than 180,000 troops and blah blah blah. Right? Um, but at the same time, he has implied that this war is world changing. In all his speeches, he talks about how this will realign the entire world. That's not untrue. That's still happening. But um, the problem is how long can that go on if Russia isn't safe, if Russia looks weak, right? How does this fit into the new economic alliances that are forming? For instance, Saudi Arabia has formally asked to join BRICS. Algeria is working on their papers to sign BRICS. So this now includes Argentina, Egypt, Turkey. So big changes are happening. Um, but a lot of these countries, I don't know, they might change their minds or they might change the purpose of BRICS later on. I'm not an expert on these things. They haven't so far, despite the way the war is going.
Yeah, there's also a possibility with a lot of the countries mentioned that they can, I wouldn't say very easily, but there certainly is an avenue of strong arming them on the part of the American empire if the failures of Russia do continue to make it look weaker on the world stage. And then China is also an unknown quantity because we haven't seen them engage in its, let's just say, for example, Crimea. They haven't tried anything about Taiwan or any other territorial dispute or anything of that scale. So for now, it's just a loose economic union of states that are not necessarily in the best terms of the U.S. and looking for alternatives, which was bolstered by, again, Russia's special military operation, war, whatever you want to call it, showed that there was going to be a breaking in the global order, that they were going to be taking a different direction. But when that different direction, once again, to touch on what you said, starts to be taken in, let's just say, much less favorable direction, when you still do have the situation dragging on when you haven't seen any progress in months. In fact, you've actually seen Ukrainian counteroffensives since August, and then with the recent news this week, it does make you question what how big these changes are actually going to be if the main theater of it, which is Ukraine, is going the way it is.
Right. Like we have a concept of what all these big changes and and multipolarization means. But like I won't even talk about what the outcome of that will be with regards to the war, but the meaning of it could be something else entirely. And one of the ways maybe we can speculate on that is it looks like the way this war was conducted was done so as a kind of a like a judicious, sneaky move that could work, right? We go in, there's a quick capitulation, and then the ball is in the West Court, and so on and so on, and that's that. And everything goes on its merry way. Um, Behind that is a feeling like maybe they cannot do a sustained war. Like like there's a lot of factors. I personally think that one of the reasons why they wanted, like they went with a quick resolve by creating a division between Zelensky and his political um, advisors or maybe rival factions within even the Ukrainian military command. I think part of that is the public, the Russian public, was not prepared for this. Uh, Jinping, whatever one might say about him, is actually preparing China for a conflict and has been doing so. Doesn't want one, but is preparing them very gradually. Will take the humiliation, but so far he's preparing them. Um, Putin hasn't really done that. Um, I think the argument about Putin's obsession with legalism, like, just has to be thrown out. Like, he's either the appropriate leader or he's not. Like, he's either willing to fight in Ukraine the way he fought in Chechnya, or he's not.
Look,
Um,
I completely agree, and I would say that if I had to pinpoint anything about Putin at this point, I do think that these past 20 some years of relative success has created a bit of overconfidence, both in terms of the limited military operations that have taken place like Syria, and again, the more extensive military operations that have taken place like Chechnya, or when it comes to just any of the diplomatic or domestic successes that he's had. I believe that, especially when it comes to, I would say Syria, considering the fact that you have the general who's in charge of Syria now playing such an active role in Ukraine right now, it I can attribute a lot of it to overconfidence, and I would agree with you that any of the arguments that whether Putin has this legalistic mindset or not, the question is like he's either capable of providing the leadership needed for this war, or he's not.
right. Uh, I would actually, I think I figured out uh, where he might have become arrogant, because I think his decision to fight the war the way he did is based in reality, in the sense that he knows that nobody is going to come to Russia's aid, so he has to win the diplomatic front. He knows the Russian public doesn't want like a huge war. That has changed now, particularly after the defeats in August and September. But I'm talking about the way the war was introduced, the way it proceeded. And I would say that it was probably the economics of that was the best part that he prepared, was for the economic fallout. That's the number one thing. I think he still sees that as the main driving force that will change the world more than taking territory. Probably, like, the other thing we should keep in mind as we're talking about Kherson is not especially pro-Russian. This is where some of like the first protesters against, there were not very many, but against him, against Russian forces occurred. This is where I think, no, I could be wrong. It was either like in the north around Kiev or Sumy or somewhere, or it was in Kherson where, just a bunch of boomers like with Molotov cocktails tried to set a tank on fire, and then were just blown out of the place. But that is to say, like, um, he cannot, like, he has to he has to convince the people who don't want them there that it's in their better interest. Leaving Kherson does not solve that issue. And then you have the added embarrassment of having these referenda and then a huge ceremony where everything is signed, right? In a way, I think like all of this is happening in order to demonstrate to the Russians, like, well, we're also democratic and we have certain procedures that have to go in place, and the Constitution is very important. Like, all of this is happening when a really, like, super important war is being fought. Um, I don't even understand the logic of even doing the referendums, of even having the ceremony. I don't even understand why that happened. I cannot I can't even imagine just the level of black pill that, like, some of the soldiers and some of the Russian public is under right now. Like, I would say this: if Russia ceases to attack the energy centers of Ukraine, it's finished. It's over. The war is over. They lost. And if he thinks he's going to get a Minsk III agreement, he's a fool. There is no Minsk III agreement. He cannot say a year before the war that the West is non-negotiable and then expect negotiations, right? Like, you can't say that out of pity, or self-pity, I should say. Um, because, as I said, this will make Crimea more vulnerable. Um, the soldiers are going to be demoralized. Men will die for certain, for larger goals. If they believe they're dying for nothing, and they're dying for some kind of Kremlin machinations in the background, some kind of deals that are being made, that have to deal with, I don't know, restoring pipelines, or we don't
They're
know
going to
if
die
that's
for
happening.
nation, not politics.
Yes. Um, like, Russians already have a sense of inferiority with the Westerners to some degree, anyways, right? I know that they don't all do, but many of them are very disappointed with Russia, that I know personally. They're still proud. They still want Russia to succeed. They want Russia to exist. That's my caveat for that. But uh, if because, like, none of it made sense. I mean, okay, the amassing of troops on Kherson, why not take them out? Because it's the same old, right? They're going in cities, in towns like Krivoy Rog, and the Russians don't want to attack them because, the public in this area has not faced 8 years of war. They've faced filtration by Ukraine Nazis who want to expunge any kind of pro-Russian sentiments in there. But the fact of the matter is, I think the Russians are aware in these regions the amount of support for them is less. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 60-40 for them. But they're not hardened the way the people in East Ukraine are, where they might think like, okay, I mean, they literally did that. There were village. The bombs were going off, and the Russian citizens were staying there, or there were Ukrainian Russian speaking people who were saying, I'll stay here. I'll take my chances. As long as the Yukis leave, the Russians will come in. I'm happy with that. They literally did that. They literally did that. I don't think there's the same amount of confidence that in Kherson that can happen, or even in Zaporozhye. Zaporozhye less so, but in Kherson, that's the feeling that I get. And now they're in a pickle because you can talk all you want about like, well, we're on the other side of the river now and blah blah blah. Um, where are you going to be on the other side of the river? I've looked on the map. I could be wrong. Somebody can correct me, but there are no big town. There's nothing bigger than Kherson City on the east side, the southern part of Kherson. So where are you gonna store your equipment? What's to prevent the Ukrainians from crossing over? Like there is either there either has to be some kind of a master plan, or this is just going to keep rolling out of control because it's looking like that's the case. And 82,000 troops have mobile troops from the conscription have been put in place. It's not a conscription; these are all reservists, but they're in. So 38,000 of them are in the back. There's about 49,000 that are now in rotation, serving on the front. What I'm told is the majority of that 49, 50,000 is in Kherson. Not all of it, but most of it. So I'm, I had a friend of mine ask me, so do you think it would have been, what, you think it's better to like lose all this material and men? I go, yeah. I mean, look, the argument against the Russians in World War II in Finland, oh yeah, they won, but they lost so many men. I always said this, that if the same thing happens to the Ukrainians, but they win, all those detractors who hate Russia anyways will never accept that criticism from them. What will they say? They will say, well, we were braver, which is exactly what I was saying about the Russians in World War II. They were just braver. They were just more willing to die.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's going to be a cost in blood, and again, while you can talk about the various negotiations, well, after a certain point, once you commit to it, you actually have to commit to it, and you also have to trust that the men that you are asking to commit to this actually do. And time again has showed that they will respect you more, and that you will get more success out of them if you do just tell them straight up. And as you were alluding to earlier, when they believe that they're actually out there on the front lines for nation rather than political machinations, the results are going to be far better than whatever the alternative may be.
Right. Because what I mean, you think they feel bad now. What happens if Crimea is in danger in 2, 3, 4, 5 months? What then? What are you going to tell them then? Right? Like you had a whole swearing in ceremony, all this celebration. Crimea is now Russian again. Um, not since 1953, and so on and so on.
And how many times
Well,
has the "we're never leaving again" has been said by how
right,
many
right.
officials? And again, and you also look at particularly, I think of what happened in Kharkov over the summer, late summer, early fall, where these people who were, again, a large amount of them supported being integrated into Russia were abandoned. They were left behind. Now, you had the civilian evacuations, but again, you have these forces showing up saying, we're going to protect you from your home. We're going to stand against
No,
this regime
no.
that has. They're going to
They've
stand.
lost them.
Oh
They've
yeah, yeah.
lost them.
They have completely spurned whatever trust they may have had, and these people once again are the biggest victims of all of this because it's either Kiev that hates them or Moscow that won't stand for them.
Right. You have that tragic story of all those teachers and policemen. We don't know what happened to them. They're probably mostly dead.
Or
Something like 80.
those Ukrainian Telegram channels that went around. I think it was in Kharkov after the Ukrainian forces
Yeah,
moved back in, and anyone who accepted basic food aid was considered a collaborator, and that's how once again, even in places where the Russians had less support, like Kherson or wherever it may be, you're going to be treated like that no matter what. And once again, that is not only did you integrate these people, you say they're Russian citizens now on Russian territory, you're letting that happen to a population you claim as your own.
Right. The problem is right from the beginning, Putin was always negotiating. Let me explain. The official negotiations aren't the real negotiations. The unofficial negotiations are the real negotiations. When they see that he only has amassed 180,000 troops, they know he's negotiating for something. Or, maybe there'll be like a split in the upper echelons of Ukrainian power and they'll get what they want. I'm sure he was betting on that in the beginning. In the South, it worked out for him very well. And the North, has to be said, they held on for 7 months, for 6, 7 months. But all along the way, the lack of forces are indicating negotiations. I want a negotiation here. I have not brought enough troops. I haven't even brought my best equipment. I'm not taking out bridges. Yes, he took out the Odessa, the bridge that links Odessa to Romania. He, I, he did do some of that, but not nearly enough. It was a fraction of what could have been done. And uh,
And frankly, I'll just say, devil's advocate, there's an argument for that. In a country that you're, or at least parts of it that you're trying to integrate, you don't want to leave yourself a larger cleanup bill than you need to. But again, after a certain point, you actually need to do something to obtain that territory rather than just preserve it in hopes of being able to walk in cleanly one day.
right, but for Western and Central Ukraine,
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean
there
that
should
that should have been
never,
completely on the table.
absolutely, absolutely. And he didn't do it. Like I say, there's only one path to victory right now. And that path to victory is he must sustain the attacks on energy, infrastructure, and water. And he must continue to do it into the winter. He must do that. Uh, Otherwise, this whole thing will keep rolling. Oh, Zakharova said something about, there could be some kind of negotiation. There was a hint at that. That's why I said, like, maybe they're thinking of a Minsk 3. No way. The neocons are not going, like, they smell blood right now. This is only going to encourage the West to send more weapons, more men. This is the best news they've had since the beginning of the war. This is it today. And if they let up on that, I don't know what is going to happen.
At at this point, once again, that I would say Russia has put itself in a position where a Pyrrhic victory is the best outcome. If they can secure a land route to Crimea, that is the best outcome. Forget about cutting off the coastline. Forget about Novorossiya. Forget about everything east of the Dnieper. That's look. Unless there's some sort of major change in action, which would require major escalation that I simply do not see even being feasible, it's your
Well,
best. Their best option is you get the land bridge to Crimea, and even that's pushing it, in my opinion.
well, remember in September I said after the last of Kharkov, I said people who keep, and I'm talking about like YouTube celebrities who have been covering this war on a daily basis. Do not listen to people who are telling you that Russia is going to take Odessa or Nikolaev. I said that way back. I said that 2 months ago, or a week shy of 2 months ago, and I still maintain that. Um, Russia committed 15% of its military potential for this war. Um, I think we're learning that they should have committed a lot more right from the beginning. And Putin had 8 years to convince the Duma. Granted, there were a lot of enemies. It was uncertain what the oligarchs would do, how much power they would have. What all of this was successful. So a mobilization or a rearrangement of, without having to call for a mobilization conscription, could have been done much sooner. The opportune time would have been when Avestal and Mariupol fell. That the Ukrainian were their morale was crushed. Much of their army originally that they positioned there was crushed. What they should have done is, even without calling a mobilization, they should have taken another 10-15% of their troops from elsewhere, because they have this huge military. It's all over the place. And they should have committed it
Oh yeah,
into
yeah, and any
into into
shortfalls they
Ukraine.
need for any other deployments, whether that be domestic or to less important theaters, put the reservists there. Use your professional active military that you have ready to go.
Yeah,
Send them to the. I mean, what is it? Just shy of 1 million men active duty Russian military without even
something like that.
reactivating any of the
It's massive.
reserves.
Like send the mobile force like out into, around, keep an eye on Kazakhstan. Don't, like, you have these other guys that are living the military life every day. Bring them, like, it makes it makes no sense. Like I say, he was always negotiating. He always wanted to negotiate some kind of a peace, and he would have. And I'm sure he thought, because remember, he had no intention on Zaporozhye. He had no intention on Kherson. He never said he was going to take them. Really, what happened is he was forced. He forced himself into this position, and then he had to make this fanfare about it, and now it's all blown up in his face.
And of course, this is after 8 years of being very wishy-washy in the Ukrainian issue. And you can even look at some of the internal reports that come out of Russia that a lot of people did get, let's just say, shaken down, so to speak, for being too pro-Russian when it comes
That's
to
right.
the Ukraine conflict. That they actively stymied people who wanted to go over there, or send any kind of support over there. That they threw men like Strelkov under the bus, frankly. And then, I mean, that's not even getting into Gibi and Molderola, who were, in my opinion, lost their lives because of the Kremlin's actions. And again, that's not to take anything away from whatever the regime in Kiev is doing, but they were certainly let down, in my opinion.
Yeah, he never had intention to save Donbass. He only wanted Crimea, and he thought he could work out some kind of a deal with the West. And uh, you know, obviously, I mean, the West came prepared to fight a war. They um, there were a lot of times it looked like the Ukrainians were going to throw in the towel. Like I say, particularly as the Russians started to inflict far more losses on them than the reverse in the spring, and Mariupol fell, and Avestal, and all of that stuff. And like I say, that would have been the opportune time. But in June they took Lysychansk and Severodonetsk and Rubozhnye, and things were looking up. And the stalling really didn't begin until August. But the whole time, at that time, Ukraine was on its fourth or fifth mobilization. So they never stopped mobilizing.
And also, it goes back to what we were discussing with the principle of how men will die for country and not for political aims. That a lot of the Ukrainian forces who have been mobilized in this conflict, they don't care about Zelensky, they don't care about Azov. Most of them don't care about any of these things. They care about Ukraine as a nation. And that's the reason why they're willing to become, again, human waves in this sort of thing that has been successful for them.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think things are really dicey right now. This could be the beginning of Russia losing the entire war, a destabilization of Russia. Like I say, the signs to look out for that would contradict those conclusions would be, is Russia still bombing the infrastructure of Ukraine? Are things going as well planned for a winter offensive? Because frankly, if they're still going to play this defensive game, it's not going to work out. And all this talk about, Jake Sullivan getting Zelensky to go to the negotiating table, frankly, that's just BS. They're not negotiable. Like it, think how many things America has promised not to do, and then they do it. Whether it's with the Chinese or the Russians, sometimes they come through in their promises, like when they said there won't be any Nord Stream, and lo and behold, there's no Nord Stream. Um, so that's what I would say is if attacks on infrastructure cease, it's over. It's totally over. And frankly, even that might not be enough. Like um, they have to like attack railroads. They like bridges. I mean, this.
I mean, they
We
painted
talked about.
themselves in so much of a corner where it does have to actually be a state of total war in order for them to salvage anything out of this.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking way back when the Kherson, sorry, the Kharkov counteroffensive took place when they lost Izium. Just before they lost it, there like there's a small river that winds through there, and there are 5 bridges. Not one of those bridges was attacked. Not one. For for 6 months, not one was attacked, and they knew that they were, increasing their forces there. Uh, it boggles the mind. Um, they knew that they didn't have enough forces to defend it. I mean, even this operation is ridiculous because you've got this offensive that is divided in 3 or 4 parts, and there isn't a direct communication under one leader. Like, how is that even possible? Until Surovokin, and Surovokin today said something really quite remarkable. I mean, he, in a sense, is, if I'm getting this right, he's basically just washed his hands clean of Kherson and Zaporozhye. Because again, he said, our mission is to secure the Donbass and Crimea and work on um, a future with Ukraine. Like, so what are you going to do? Are you going to leave all of Kherson now, that little bit you've got, and then
I mean, this is the kind of
Zaporozhye?
rhetoric that would have been even, just say, uncertain in 2016, 2017, that should have been completely off the table after February 24th, 2022. And once again, they just keep kicking this can down the road. And I don't really know how many more ways I can phrase that. And I mean, look, I'll be honest. I was kind of coping about the August September counteroffensives. I would say I tried to stay measured there, and perhaps I'm going too far in the other direction now, but I see really, again, short of total war, which I do not believe will happen for a second, no way of salvaging this.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I don't think so, like some people I don't think realize how serious this is. Like I say, there had better be something because eventually this will stop. This will continue rather uh, until Putin is out of office. Like Putin has remember all those stupid protests that they tried to do in 2021. All the like hardly anybody showed up. It was also in the middle of winter. Like this was supposed to be like some protest movement. It was
Yeah, yeah,
another
Navalny's
stupid
revolution.
American. It was another stupid American gay op, and nothing came of it. It was actually kind of hilarious to watch. And like I don't know what they were thinking that they would get something like they saw in Belarus, and even that didn't go anywhere. Well, I mean. now there is actually a first step towards something like that happening, because they're going to be so demoralized. Um, you there's a bit of a hint of World War I happening right now.
Maybe it's a good thing Zhirinovsky didn't live to see any of this.
Well, I know.
I think that would have put him in the grave, frankly, if he would have made it any longer. But I mean, maybe he's the man Russia needed but didn't deserve. But that does leave speculation. I agree with you that in terms of regime stability, if this continues in the direction that it is, which it shows no signs of stopping, then I mean, Putin will be embattled, if not out of power, by March of this upcoming year.
Yeah, like I say, it's up in the air right now. They can turn it around. They know what they have to do. They've been doing the right thing up until today, with the taking out of the infrastructure. Winter is coming. This is the time to do it. Even the time to start the war was well done after COVID, and inflation rising in the West. The economic front has been perfection for Russia. And now, if he doesn't want to screw the pooch, right? He's got another 220,000. I'm told it's actually 316,000. Um, and there's still like 70,000 reservists, volunteers. Sorry. Uh, he's literally got another like 280,000 guys that can come in. It's up to him. It's up to him. That should be more than enough.
I mean, for Putin personally, this is a 20 plus year legacy on the line, and for Russia
Yeah.
as a nation, as a civilization, it is a 20 plus year recovery from the brink of a civilizational death on the line.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because, I mean, I know we've talked about a lot of people have talked about a lot, but I think in recent years, because they have regained their footing, a lot of people forgot, even just in the early 2000s, how down and out Russia was and how close it was
Yeah.
to collapse, to
Collapse.
fragmenting. And even the Chechen issue was just recently resolved and still ongoing once again into the late 90s, early 2000s. And that this is a nation, although it has rebuilt itself to a degree, is still on very fragile footing and still very close to what it was in the 1990s in terms of political stability. That once again, you get a chain of events similar to the one we may be seeing unfolding to put it right back where it was and possibly even go even further than that if proper pressure is applied. Because keep in mind, although I'm not going to defend the actions of a lot of Western governments and Western private individuals and Western corporations, there was an attempt to quote unquote rebuild Russia. Now, a lot of that was just scraping off the top and taking what they can get from it. But now you have all those forces who wanted to rebuild it, maybe in their image, but rebuild it nonetheless, dedicated to wanting to tear it down.
Hmm.
But that's all the news I had over the recent news out of Kherson. If you have anything more to add, certainly. If not, I have quite a bit of other news items, particularly about Europe and the recent U.S. elections.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, getting into European news is going to be a little bit of a roundup because we, once again, haven't done a show in about a week and a half. So, I'll start out with just some basic inflation numbers that I saw. So, this is just out of Eastern Europe, and this is compared to some of the military aid given to Ukraine. So this is just a share of military budget given to Ukraine for military aid. So Latvia is given 41% of its total military budget, Estonia 37, Lithuania 16.7, Poland 15%, Luxembourg 13, Slovakia 10, Czech Republic 9.4, Slovenia 8.5, UK 7.6, Denmark 6.2, Norway and Canada both at 4.4, Sweden at 4.3, US at 3.6, Germany at 2.4, and 0.5% on France's part. And then that is just contrast with some recent inflation numbers out of Eastern Europe. That would be 24.12 out of Lithuania, 23.7 out of Estonia, 22.2 out of Latvia, and 17.9 out of Poland. So just to keep in mind everything we just talked about with Ukraine, just those numbers I rattled off from various Western and NATO nations, the amount they've dumped into it. On paper, at least, and again, you can talk about some of the exact situations, but with this recent news, to reiterate once again, the billions poured into it, the inflation being suffered right now, the economic hardship, the political instability in many Western nations as a result of all of this is being shown to have been paid off. So your pain is worth it. If you just endure, we can achieve X, Y, or Z goal, and that certainly won't be the last you see of it. Keep in mind that this entire crisis, compounded with the previous crisis of COVID, convinced the United States, and I mean, in a way they're sort of right, that they can go into Europe and just clean house, take everything they need, and prop up their own economy while leaving Europe out to starve because it's in the service of a greater goal like Ukraine. And with the recent news, at least on the surface of it, and if things continue, it does present something of a justification for that. It will convince enough of the population to go along with these policies going forward. So if there are energy shortages this winter and onward in 2023, if there's economic crisis onward, and think especially about a country like Germany, a lot of it will be, well, at least we defeated the great threat to Western liberal democracy. At least we pushed them back, and at least we supported the front line of democracy, which is how they've tried to sell Ukraine for the past year now. And even going further, even before the entrance of Russian troops into Ukraine on the 24th of February, you still did have this kind of rhetoric that came out of Ukraine. Now, just for our other European news, you do have Hungary. You have Orban in Hungary, who is hosting John Mearsheimer in light of all of this, which I thought was a bit of a strange move, all things considered. I don't think it's directly linked to any of that. I mean, but just keep in mind the circumstances in which all of this had just happened. So you have this announcement about Kherson and Russia's seeming naivete about the idea of a negotiation being possible. And that is compounded with you have the declarations of France and Germany when it comes to just the current situation in general. You have Olaf Scholz visiting China, and it does seem like there is this rush in order to just put things back into place. Everyone's trying to mitigate the damage and get back to a pre-war status, even on the Russian side. And again, this also ties into even just days before this Kherson news, there was announcements of a possible ceasefire and negotiation going on behind the scenes. And once again, you brought up Jake Sullivan's visit to Kiev, blah, blah, blah. But it does seem that although this recent news came out just before then, there were signs of tiring with some of the statements out of France and Germany regarding this, and that things may have been coming to a breaking point, and perhaps that's what forced this. Perhaps Russia announced this because they could agree to some peace deal combined with U.S. pressure, but it once again creates a very muddled situation. Now, I wanted to get into the Orban Mearsheimer visit because you have Orban, who has consistently been the closest thing you can get to a neutral voice in the Ukrainian conflict, and you have Mearsheimer, who is somebody who said that a Western confrontation with Russia over Ukraine would be ill advised. And that's, once again, on top of everything with that. You can, maybe Orban's trying to provoke some sort of negotiation with Mearsheimer, who is a controversial yet respected figure. And once again, it creates this very strange dynamic that I'll be honest, I can't quite put my finger on what exactly the rationale for that was going forward. But it does lend to the idea that there may be some sort of negotiation piece that Russia may at least think it's going to get the Minsk 3 that it hopes for. But once again, we can just go back to what we were just saying, why that's a poor idea, why that simply isn't on the table. Is this some sort of thing, and maybe Orban's being taken advantage of in this situation too, and he doesn't quite realize it. Which, I mean, although he's an intelligent man, it's not like he's omnipotent. It's not like he knows everything. Where perhaps Mearsheimer is allowed to go over there to create that illusion, but it something is on the horizon. Certainly, whether that be a great escalation of this, whether that be some sort of very loose and poorly thought out negotiations that, once again, I can't quite put my finger on, just out of that news in particular in Europe.
Yeah, you do get that sense that there's something in the works here. I think Mearsheimer going was like a total surprise. I just I thought, what? But there it was, the photo. He's there with Orban. I did not expect that. And if you follow Mearsheimer on YouTube, he's constantly um, posting stuff for Colonel McGregor, for Scott Ritter, for that other gentleman who's also ex-military that's looks to be about his age. And so there is this kind of team effort. All of them are constantly posting the other person's latest video. McGregor is now doing these rambling videos. I mean, they're not rambling videos. They're like Scott Ritter's. Scott Ritter would do these videos that are like 3-4 hours long, but they're interviews that he did with the Gray Zone, this group, that group, and it just goes on and on and on. But I look at that as kind of like, I don't know. They're the town criers, and they're there to wake people up. I think the impression I get is they were very afraid of like a nuclear war. Now they're boomers in the sense that, like, I mean, like an American victory in Ukraine only emboldens the very world that you hate, the world that I hate. And I'm going to be honest, I don't even care if, you know, I would rather risk the alternative than the surety of like America winning this, because it just it's just more shit.
Oh, I
It's just,
that
it's
that
not
that
it's
that
not
is
even worth it. It's not even worth it.
that is a man who is. I mean this in the most generous and loving way possible, but that is a man who has lived much longer than I have. Speaking from it, because I have to admit, maybe it is a difference of age. Maybe it is that you are in your 50s, I'm in my 20s, but I prefer not to see the alternative at least anytime in the near future. But
Yeah,
yeah, I certainly get what you're saying, that if the worst possible outcome comes out of Ukraine, which is the American victory, that the alternative might. Again, I
like
certainly.
an American defeat is not. We don't necessarily know what would happen if there was an
Yeah,
American defeat.
yeah,
Well, we do know what would happen if there was an American victory.
yeah. True, and I agree with you insofar as that. But in terms of like, I was thinking of let's just say the apocalyptic scenario that the nuclear weapons get broken out, which that's what I
Well, we
was.
all got to go.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose. Yeah, I mean that's yeah. I really can't argue with that. You got me there. Yeah, but I would certainly agree with you insofar as that I would rather take the unknown rather than the certain when it comes to the outcome of this conflict, because we know that, I mean, in my personal opinion, anyone who does not toe the party line in Western nations in the event of some sort of Ukrainian victory will face the full might of whatever state that they're in. And that's going to be worse, particularly in the US, the UK, and just the Anglosphere in general.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that America has been preparing for this war for a very long time. The attacks on Trump are a preparation for this war. The attempt to make Trump seem like Russia are part of the war effort. And the clamping down, the intolerance for any contrarian point of view, you can see just how effective it is. Like the West literally has no other belief system. It has nothing else it can offer. It doesn't matter how ridiculous the elections look. The system itself is still capable of going on and on, and that's why I say it's just like, you know, I just don't I don't want to see this continue anymore. Um, because I mean it will it'll be I mean I mean what can you expect? Well, I mean you'll just see more trannies going to your church. That's what you're going to see. You're going to see just more of this crap. That's what you're going to see. That's ultimately what an American victory is.
Oh, yeah, I would agree that in the event of that, even in the political victories, that the civic religion at home and abroad will be once again much more harshly enforced. And that's what I was also getting at when I was saying that
Hmm.
anyone who doesn't toe the party line is going to face even more scrutiny and more harsh treatment. Now, because of the system in the U.S., I can't believe I'm actually praising the American legal system, although that is quickly degrading. There are still some fail safes in place, but once again, they can unperson you, they can mess with your bank accounts, they can uh, destroy your reputation. In other Western countries, especially other Anglosphere countries, they are liable to take much harsh treatment on you. But be assured, if you don't toe the party line, whether that be on Ukraine or LGBTQCIA or BLM or any of these things that they have made idols out of, in the event of a reinvigorated American empire at home and abroad, well, you're going to be the first one that, at best, becomes a social outcast. And that's assuming you aren't already one, if you have the displeasure of some of your more controversial views being public knowledge. And you're going to be the first one to lose access to your bank account. You're going to be the first one to get shaken down. You're going to be the first one to, again, face all sorts, more or less whatever they can throw at you. Because, and like you said, they did this with Trump, and frankly, they also did it with his supporters and any population that didn't go along with whatever the newest tenet of the civic religion was. You're like Russians. You're Russian agents. You're on the Kremlin payroll. You're blah 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 blah. How many media figures have said that about? How many politicians have they said that about? Once again, they're already preparing for in the situation that if they do win, those people are going to be the first ones to face the wrath. Now, Trump, they're making an example out of because he's sort of the figurehead, and again, they sort of also made him the figurehead out of this. But I mean, don't be fooled. This isn't going to stop Trump or any high-ranking politician. They're going to do this to whoever they can, whether you're of great renown, little renown. If you're a small business owner, they'll once again they'll hit you where it hurts there. And I mean, like I said, while it may not be they kick down your door in the middle of the night, in which case in some countries it might be that case, they certainly have plenty they can throw at you, and they will throw at you in the event that the American Empire is allowed to continue in its current form, or frankly any form at this rate.
Hmm. Well, I mean, you remember earlier today I sent you like that screen cap. I don't know why, but the Tim Kirby um, the Tim Kirby channel on Telegram. You could always normally go in and make a comment. Now you have to belong to a chat, and the chat is just the most ridiculous boomer shit you've ever seen. Like, I'll just read to you uh, a conversation that took between two different people.
And let me just
Uh,
guess, let me just get the current disavowals out of the way. Of course, we endorse nothing that was said. We have no
yeah,
connections
yeah,
to any of these people. This just so
yeah,
happened to be a conversation that you came across, and we can no way be held responsible for their words or actions.
yeah. Like I'm beginning. Is this like a honeypot thing? Anyhow, but I bring it up only to show you how after even all these years, the last six in particular, there are grown men who are still wedded to the fucking Constitution. I can't even believe this. Anyways, he says, I agree with you. Uh, but what can the real Americans do now? I like Americans who talk about the real Americans, like they're so delusional. Like they like calling them elites and globalists, and I get it, we do too. But a lot of the reasons they do that is because they don't want to acknowledge that they're Americans, right? And yes, many of them are Jewish, but they're not all Jewish. This would never work
But once again, they're
otherwise.
also very well embedded to the point where it's becoming one and the same.
Yes, that's right. Uh, Hit the streets with their guns and shed blood. It doesn't sound like much of a future, certainly not one that even more than, say, 10% of patriots would ever be willing to embark on. In other words, I hate to say it, but I think the time for meaningful battle is over. The occupation has begun. The rest will be small guerrilla warfare tactics. All true patriots will be called domestic terrorists. This is what the entire program of domestic terrorism over the past 20 years has really been all about, to prepare for any resistance to their takeover. And then the guy responds, surrender is not a word familiar with me. End of discussion.
I mean, it's funny because like there, there is an underlying truth in that insofar as like they do create these they do they do create a lot of these things once again as a tactic to take care of the inconvenient people, but once again viewing it from that framing is it's I'm not sure whether to call it extreme optimism or delusion, maybe a little both.
Yeah. Now, this conversation was a long back and forth between these two guys. And the Constitution, that won't happen because our Constitution, like, it's amazing the magical thinking Americans have over their Constitution. It just boggles my mind.
I mean, and this is also in the same country, and this is the country I do hail from. But this is the same country that in 1805 its own Supreme Court gave itself final say over everything. At that point, what does any legal document mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and
There was another guy who interjected in this conversation who said something like, gender, race, doesn't matter. You have to be an American patriot. Nothing else matters. So again, proposition nation thinking. I mean, it's already over. It's already over. Like, and that rot is spreading. America is literally spreading that rot everywhere.
you know what? I I feel like tonight's the night, if any night, that I break out the controversial take, but I'll keep it even measured. I'm going to say, and this is going to this might cause a lot of disagreements, and feel free to tell me I'm wrong. I'm willing to hear counter arguments to this, but the GAA, the Globalist American Empire, started in 1861 at the latest. The latest.
Mm, yeah. Well, I don't know if you saw Fisted by Foucault, Soldo's tweet. He said something like, America has always been a liberal a liberal country. Deal with it. And
Love him or hate him, and love or hate the statement, I I can't disagree.
oh, I know, I don't either. And there's that guy who I forget his. I'll find it. I'm nearly there. Um, I can't believe this is what our shows come down to, is evaluating.
Look, it
Oh
was
yeah,
it
so
was
this is what.
inevitable.
Yeah, so this is what Fisted said. America is constitutionally, politically, socially, culturally, and economically liberal. Deal with it. And then Echo Chamber says, not an interesting point. Quote unquote liberalism means what exactly? Democrats aren't liberal. Like, this guy is like another person completely out to lunch. Then this guy's 2015 guy says, in that case, Europe is doomed. You're going to have to deal with it too. Again, there is the petty American competitiveness, right? And what did Fisted by Foucault say? He said, "Yeah, I know, definitely." In fact, it was just one word, definitely. So um, it's kind of like the way Academic Agent made all those people, all those Americans mad. Anyhow, it just this whole thing with her Kherson has like what it will just embolden more. I don't know. In the same way that women are so stupid to sacrifice their children by exposing them to like trans grooming. Um, European leaders will do the same to their own population to win this war. They will.
Yeah, absolutely. It is once again that sacrifice that is noble to make, and it has been shown that. And once again, you can debate about numbers on the ground all day. You can debate about the minutia, which again, if you haven't noticed, the show covers in great detail. But at a certain point, it comes down to public perception. It comes down to do a significant portion of the population, does a significant portion of the population thinks this is working, therefore the policy is able to continue.
Hmm.
And that will be the fate of Europe. Europe will be, in large part, sacrificed on this altar. And it's unfortunate we've gone into some of the figures that have come out of Germany. We've gone into some of the figures that have come out of all these major corporations that are leaving Germany, leaving Europe in general. And I think it was about 3, 4 weeks ago. I can't remember who said it, but they were listing off all these companies that survived 2 world wars,
Yes.
Marxism, and all of these complete upheavals. Some of the most tumultuous times in human history are undone
150-year-old companies.
are undone by fealty to the American Empire, and it's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. It worked,
But I suppose
all
with all
that.
this focus on the American Empire, we should get into a little bit of midterm news.
Yes, we should.
So, I will just start out by showing you my prediction map versus the actual map. So, what we have right there is the actual map thus far, and on the left hand side, we have my prediction map. So, I was wrong about Pennsylvania. Okay, I that was probably my least certain one. Georgia went into a runoff. They will be having a round two election on, I believe it's December 5th, because neither candidate was able to pull off a solid majority, which is, again, that 50.1%. Because there were third party candidates, there was whatever else. Nevada and Arizona are still being counted. And of course, because I am compliant with YouTube terms of service and compliant with just the narrative, it just takes a long time to count some states, It's just the way it is. I was right about Ohio. I was right about Wisconsin. And North Carolina was the other one I was thought that there might be a possibility it would go blue. Not too much of a possibility, but thus far, we have the jury out on 3 swing states. So it's pretty inconclusive thus far. My prediction of a 52-48 split could come true if Georgia in the runoff goes red, but I am thinking as of now, after everything is said and done, it's probably going to either revert back to the 50-50 status quo, which of course with the vice presidential vote puts it in a technical Democratic majority, or go into a slight Republican majority with a 51-49 split. The House, once again, the results, some of them are still out. It looks like the GOP is set to take a very slim majority, and it looks like the governors are going to be split 25-25. Now, of course, not every governor was up for election, but the ones that were, GOP lost a couple seats. Those were out of Massachusetts and Maryland, so the loss of blue state Republicans who, I mean, in terms of policy, weren't really that impressive, at least in my opinion. But I do think, and once again, I'll need to see the full results, which who knows how long that might take at this rate. But I would say the American political system is entering into a gridlock phase. That you aren't going to get sweeping majorities anymore. You aren't going to get anyone who has any real mandate to do something. You're either going to get a party that can barely push through what it wants to, or a party with enough numbers in order to stonewall anything they want to. And even then, we've seen over the past couple of years of the Biden administration, there are enough red states when it comes to congressional districts and the Senate that are willing to defect to get through some of, let's just say, the less favorable policies, that they will play along with a lot of what is to be done. Now, maybe with the slight majority, they might be able to stonewall some of that and actually push back against some of that. We'll see how effective they actually are. But once again, here I am talking about American electoral minutia after we just discussed this is just the overarching American empire. But just in terms of the internal functions of it, this wasn't a red wave, it wasn't a blue wave. It was a gridlock election. And frankly, I think that might be for the best. I think the most bogged down the American political system is might be for the best if just nobody is able to really do anything and nobody can really move the needle. Now, of course, that doesn't apply to certain things. Now, we all know what those certain things are that will have that bipartisan support, that will have that overwhelming majority. Of course, those things will happen. But when it comes to a lot of issues and just functionality and credibility, it might be worth it just to go through a decade of having nobody in a real majority and nobody with the mandate to really do anything. So, although this election might not have been the red wave that even a lot of people who probably are even, viewers of this program may have wanted, I think frankly gridlock might be even better for us who really don't really have any investment in whatever this system is nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the fascinating thing about American elections right now is about how staged and rigged they are. I don't mean just like
Well,
ballot
yeah,
stuffing
of course
and
not,
voting
because
machines that don't work.
of course not, because that would never happen because we're in compliance with YouTube terms of service.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean that for me, that's the only interest they have. I don't know why Republicans winning would change anything.
No, it wouldn't.
Um,
Like on the state
like you look at
level,
the Tories in the UK, they've had over 10 years to change all the immigration laws that Tony Blair introduced, and they've never done it. And that's just one. But there's and and in Britain, they don't need 66% of the Senate to do it. Okay, mandate of heaven. They can enact it just like that because they have the majority. They want it. So did that happen? No, because like the whole point of the Republicans is to occupy space that would be filled by real contrarians and challengers to the internal party. That's their role. They're the beautiful losers.
oh yeah,
They have,
it's the filtration process. Now there were some quote unquote anti-establishment Republicans that got elected in a few states. Now, look, if they can serve the role of the contrarian, credit where credit is due. But I'm not optimistic for either of them, and or the ones that at least ran as the so-called anti-establishment ones. Look, if they do present an alternative voice, even if it does get trampled over, if it's just there, like I said, I'll give them the respect that they
yeah.
deserve for that. But more or less, I just get the feeling that a lot of these people are probably just going to fall in line. The best you're going to see out of this is maybe on some state levels you're going to get pushback against some of the civic religion, which just keep in mind a lot of that pushback exists because they're in the opposition right now. They're allowed to be the moderating voice. And once again, even their pushback isn't anything that impressive. They're the moderating voice of
Mhm.
the extremes in order to bring the general populace to the actual point that they want them to be at. So,
Yeah, I
it's
mean, I
like
look at the criticism that they had against Fetterman.
oh, yeah.
His appearance, the way he dresses. Obviously, there's something wrong after his stroke and everything. And like, but not policies. Like they think they can win that way. Like they literally waste their entire time since Trump with like owning the libs, right? Which like has produced nothing.
Look, and
And the guy running against him is a Turkish dude with his stupid crap TV show and was one of the
produced by
first
Oprah. Produced
produced
by
by
Oprah.
Oprah. Oh, he's so based. He was like the first to like introduce trans kids. Like, this is it. This is it. Oh no, we're not. We're not liberal. America's not like that. It's a republic or something. Like, Oh, it's infuriating.
Yeah, and like you were saying with some of that, there has been that Trump effect now. I'm sure you all know that I personally have very mixed and conflicting views on Trump, but when he did the personality game, when he would hurl the insults, when he would do those kind of attacks, those worked because he was a certain kind of personality. But now you have seemingly every Republican wants to emulate that when, frankly, most of them are not capable of that. And again, maybe they would be intelligent people on their own merits if they would approach that. I'm not saying that about Dr. Oz by no means, but you have that as the tone set where it is just becoming a. And look, I'm not going to pretend like the Democrats are innocent of this either, but it more or less is just a petty little back and forth, and it's just reality TV at this point, if we're being honest. And you look at the congressional hearings over J6, you look at any of the recent political machinations, and by recent I mean about past decade. I would say this really accelerated under the Bush Obama years. Not that it wasn't sensationalist, say for example with the whole Bill Clinton impeachment trial, but again you see it getting more and more sensationalized and exponential rate as more and more time goes on. Like I said, that probably had to start around late Bush, early Obama, to the point where it is just complete reality TV. It is just complete schlock at this point, and just something people follow the way they would follow some, a soap opera.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in 2024, I'll express some kind of a belief, and someone will call me a Nazi, and I'll say, "What? For just having popular opinions from 2016?"
I mean, yeah, yeah.
That's where this is going.
I mean, reality is a stone toss comic.
It's just,
That's
oh man,
and
it's just,
look, I'll get back to some
it really
European.
is piss world.
I'll get back to some European news because there's some stuff about Moldova and Serbia, and then I do have also some Middle Eastern news to round out the show.
Can I say just
Yeah, certainly. Go ahead.
one thing? I love Mart on Twitter. He had a tweet out earlier, like maybe a day ago. Losing to Fetterman must be one of the most humiliating things that can happen to a man. It's so true.
Okay, okay, you reminded me of that, but do you know what my favorite reaction to the Oz Fetterman election has been?
What?
It's something like the Armenian National Congress of America. It's some like Armenian diaspora advocacy group that like would just completely rail against Dr. Oz the entire election, and then they put out some tweet afterwards. It's like thanks to a coalition of Armenian, Kurdish, Jewish, and allied Americans, we were able to stop, Erdogan's advocate Mehmet Oz from being elected to the Senate. It was hilarious. Um, but
I mean, but this is, I mean, I half jokingly say that, right? I love that Mart is Argentinian, right? Like,
yeah, yeah.
but okay, yeah. So I do love, like, he's young, he's in university, and he kind of like really believes Fetterman beat him. That's not the case, right? Like, the level of politicians now is such that they have to be actors.
Oh
They
yeah,
have to be
yeah.
people who are easily bought. They don't have charisma, or they can be like Rishi Sunak in the UK, where they look like an employee. They don't look like a leader. They look like an employee, and which kind of makes it all painful because I remember Putin in that first speech that he did, where he said, y- you know, who are the real, he mentions the real leaders behind, the real owners of the system um, behind the politicians, behind this, what appears to be the system, right? That's what this is, right? All those, it's like the conversation I had with my friend Dave. I said, Trump is not going to win. I said either they won't let him win. Of course, I wanted him to win. So it wasn't easy saying it. Um, they either won't let him win, or rather, what'll happen is, like, if they run a golden retriever versus Trump, like, he will get millions of votes because of the way Trump could polarize the country, but of the way the media was so instrumental in making the population turn against Trump, right? In another era, Trump would have been incorporated into the system. The system would have looked at him and said, listen, we can make some deals with this guy. He's not going to stay in office forever. He's obviously not going to, and of course, this election, of course, was about saving democracy. Um, he's not going to do any of that. It'll pass and it'll be over. Instead, they decided to um, ossify this guy, and they made it into a problem. But I have to say, it has worked for them. And this is what I mean. So Fetterman, oh, like, none of these people matter. They could be like total garbage. It could be a woman that has an OnlyFans account that's running for governor. It won't matter
I think
because
there
for
was a
them,
few of those actually.
yeah, yeah. So all they know is this party is in charge, and no matter how stupid or incompetent these people might be, that they're not the ones with real power. People intuitively understand that now.
Yeah, and I would say quite a few understood that, but after this election cycle, and especially after 2024, that will become abundantly clear that once again, electoral politics is completely meaningless. There are no solutions within it. There is nothing to be gained of it except in terms of personal gain and kickbacks, and again, just a lot of the general corruption. And once again, will continue to the delegitimization of the system and people continuing to lose faith, which, and I have said for years, if anything has the capability to be the undoing of this system, it will be just people becoming more and more apathetic day by day.
It's possible, but you look at the amount of unmarried women that voted for the Democrats. I mean, they literally saved the party. They I know that the Republicans are probably going to take the House, but 68 or 69% of unmarried women all voted for for
Yeah,
Democrats.
I remember. I'd actually sent you that earlier. That
Yeah,
it was the biggest predictor out of anything, out of socioeconomic status, out of racial ethnic background, out of geography. The biggest predictor is: are you an unmarried woman, or are you literally anyone else? Because even unmarried men went Republican +9, and
it's amazing.
then married women was like +20 something, then married men were like +30 something GOP. But yeah, as you said, like unmarried women were like +32 uh, Democrat. And of course, with the whole Roe issue, maybe that's why they let it go, because they knew maybe it was something strategic that they were willing to sacrifice that in the goal of something greater. And again, you can speculate on that all day, or perhaps something as reinvigoration in order to bring some degree of faith back into the system from people who may have fallen out of it previously. But yeah, electoral politics, it's just a, and again, whether you want to go over any of the categories I just lifted off, it's a head count of pretty much what you are. Like what
Mhm.
bubbles do you check, and that's going to determine what party support you have. And yeah, it's nothing more beyond that. It's an increasingly less effective release valve, and frankly, given what I have to say about it, and given how much I've already said about it, I believe I've dedicated way too much time to this election on the show as it is.
Yeah, yeah.
But unless you have any final thoughts on that, I do just have a couple of European news items I will wrap up
Sure.
before getting to the Middle East.
Hmm.
So you have the protests continuing in Moldova over high energy prices, and probably the second most important story out of Europe, aside from the Kherson news, was that tensions once again are rising between Serbia and Kosovo. And this has been ongoing, this recent spat has been ongoing for several months now. You'll recall that they had the license plates laws, they had the identification laws, and you had the amassing of a number of Serbian troops on the border with Kosovo. And keep in mind, this is about 2 years after Trump tried to force through that one agreement with the what wasn't it Grinnell that he tried to force it through with the former ambassador to Germany, and of course Kushner was on top of that trying to broker some sort of peace deal negotiation between the two that Vucic signed off on, and then wanted to retract once he figured out that included a caveat where they'd move the embassy to Jerusalem. Also, speaking of which, the UK has withdrawn its support for its embassy in Jerusalem and has decided it's going to put it back in Tel Aviv. So that is just a piece of side news. But you have the tensions once again building up in Kosovo to the point where I can't say for certain whether it will boil over this time, but it's certainly the closest it's been in several years. And if this would have happened perhaps sooner, perhaps in the summer when the war in Ukraine had a much different outlook, this would have certainly been a great delegitimization that this carve out state that they took out of Serbia is under threat and would put it in a much more dire situation. And that also does make me wonder, why now? Is it because they see that Russia's on a bit of a backslide and they want to secure what they have before the American empire can really reassert itself? Or is it because they have some sort of false confidence that, well, if they're doing it there, then certainly we can go in there? Is an internal political posturing? And once again, the situation when it comes to this recent amassment is too new to really make any definitive statements on, but it is a situation that is currently developing. And while I believe that it will probably fizzle out within the next days and weeks, I would say out of all the previous scenarios, it's certainly the most significant one, and that if anything were to escalate, it would be this one.
Well, I mean, I'll say this. They have been pressuring Serbia for a very, very long time. Certainly, the war has added uh, more initiative on the West. Just as you explained earlier, that there will be less and less tolerance in the West for any diverging opinions from where the civilization is going, and the right for it to influence and impose its values on everybody else. Um, it's the same thing happening in Europe. Uh, in that, look, that whole license plate nonsense in this tiny part of Kosovo, the only place where Serbians are a majority, that was being enforced on August the 1st. We had a flare up. One Serb was killed. Then September the 1st. Then it was pushed back. Now they have an ultimatum for Serbia to basically, become part of the EU and relinquish ties with Russia, full board with sanctions. On which day? February 24th, the day that Russia began the special military operation, a year later to the date. So yes, it plays a part, but this is Serbia's been a nut that America has wanted to crack for a very long time.
Yes, and I would say the opportunity has now presented itself. Now, whether they need to use Kosovo as bait, that may be part of this, but it is an intense situation. And I mean, I've been saying for years, and I'm certainly not alone in saying this, that this is a question of when rather than if something in the Balkans is going to flare up once again. We also saw the political situation out of Bosnia over about the past year, and you had the Bosnian Serb leaders meeting with Putin in Moscow, and you also had them meeting with Serbian leadership. So the tensions, whether that be in Kosovo, whether that be with the situation in Bosnia, or even going back to the situation in Montenegro from about a year ago, it is once again a question of when rather than if something like that happens, because that is a nut they are certainly dedicated to cracking. And given the backslide of Russia in the conflict, especially with the Kherson news,
Mhm.
they are exponentially more likely, the West is exponentially more likely to push the Serbia issue. Because Russia's on backslide, it's involved in its own conflict right now that at this point definitively is not going well. So what better time to target Serbia?
Yes, like I say, Serbia and Russia have been targets for 2 decades, more than 2 decades now. There was that interesting um, interview with Putin many years ago where he said he watched 19-year-old Serbs fighting for their country, shooting the only time that white men fought against NATO, and dying for the country, and he knew that this was inevitable for Russia. Ironic on this day, right? Um, so I would say it was always there. The war has contributed to that, but the EU has been relentlessly pushing for this for a long time, and the war has exasperated it. But I don't think they ever would have stopped. For instance, you have that whole fiasco in Montenegro where they tried to seize the property of all Serbian churches in Montenegro, right? Like that's a example, and that was right after Montenegro was brought into NATO. So it's an ongoing project. Macedonia was brought into NATO. Macedonia sold its soul by recognizing Kosovo. It's just that it's an ongoing thing. With or without the war, it would have been there. But I agree with you. The war has added a kind of extra initiative, and they're using the symbolism of the war, of the dates, such as February 24th, to push forward.
Yes, and like I've been saying, like many others have been saying, it's a question of when rather than if. I wouldn't be surprised if 2023, especially considering the direction that things go in Ukraine, if we do see some sort of major flare up, major sustained flare up in the Balkans, get in that time frame, 2023, 2024. And I will remind our audience once again, as I do every time we talk about this, and every time we talk about this and I've learned about this, one of the British Special Forces intelligence, one of the contingency plans they have is they have a plan, particularly in Bosnia, to eliminate all Bosnian Serb leadership in the event of the outbreak of a conflict. So you have the British, who are especially very dedicated to the Balkan theater. And perhaps that's on behalf of the U.S., perhaps that is in their own interest, and I would say it's probably a combination of both with that. But when you look at that, again, everyone knows this is coming, and everyone has known this is coming since the very uncertain agreements of 2008 when Kosovo was officially, or quote unquote, officially carved out of Serbia. Everyone knew that that was not the end of the story and that this would come to a head eventually.
Hmm.
And it's going to come to a head sooner than later, and I can say that definitively. I thought that back in, what was it, September, late September, early October, it was going to. But and I know it's not a one for one comparison. Few comparisons ever really can be one for one. But when it comes to the amassing of troops and the political tensions, it is very similar to what we saw from about November 2021 to February 2022 before the Russian military operation actually started.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even want to fathom what's going to happen if and when it happens. I say if and when because there's a part of me that just I don't want to see it.
Oh, I completely agree, but and it like I said, I get why you're saying that, and I suppose there's only so much you can say on that isn't speculation, but I do have some Middle Eastern news if you're ready to get into that.
Hmm.
So, for starters, you had U.S. forces once again being chased out of parts of Syria. However, that was days before the U.S. also announced it was establishing a new base of operations in Syria. You had a bust of networks in Daraa, which is known as the cradle of the revolution of opposition networks. No major news out of the Idlib front, and given the situation in Syria, with how crucial Russia has been to the campaigns in northwestern Syria in particular, I doubt we're going to see much progress on the Idlib front in general, which I am fully willing to concede at this point, although it seems very minor at this point, that the last summer of Idlib is probably not true. There probably will be a summer 2023 of Idlib, in which case I again I stuck to that prediction through the end, and at this point, I'm fully willing to admit I'm wrong about that. And the situation in Ukraine has changed drastically to the point where, unless Syria gets some upswing of major support in the coming months, it's not going to happen. I mean, you already have the U.S. increasing activities in the Persian Gulf, harassing Iranian tankers. They actually
Yep.
struck one Iranian tanker that was en route to Syria with fuel supplies, and they're also, as I had just mentioned, building new bases of operation in eastern Syria near the fuel supplies, trying to wage this war of attrition against Syria, and emboldened once again by the progress in Ukraine, that they feel they can start chipping off on the peripheries again. They can go after places like Syria again. So, unfortunately, we probably will see a greater dedication to that. You have the U.S. moving military assets. They were moving F-22s into Saudi Arabia to deter any Iranian actions. Now, this is also on top of the ongoing Saudi-Iranian negotiations. The Iranians had said that their patience is wearing thin with these sort of moves, and of course, the domestic problems in Iran, the protests are still ongoing, and this is even after that one terrorist attack. So the situation is unstable there, and the U.S. also feels once again emboldened to start chipping away at the periphery by exacerbating the situation in Iran. We had discussed previously that Netanyahu is set to return to power in Israel, so you can only expect these policies to continue, especially if you get a Trump 2024 election. And once again, returning to that status quo of a Trump, BB, and Boris Johnson, whoever else, to the point where the Middle East may be completely reset. Now, as for Saudi Russian relations, those have gone pretty deep. You still do have Saudi Arabia refusing to go along with any oil deals with the U.S. at this point, so that is the probably the key
And they're
factor
raising
there.
prices
Yes, and
of oil.
yeah, they're raising prices while also hosting F-22s and putting pressures on the Iranians. So, if I had to say that, given those two factors, the Saudis are planning a major maneuver, whether that be diplomatically or much less likely militarily. But they're certainly at
Against
some.
Iran?
Um,
I don't think so,
I no,
personally.
I don't think that they're planning anything against the Iranians, but they're certainly planning for some major announcement. And like I said, this is all in the backdrop of the negotiations with the Iranians. So perhaps this is a negotiating tactic. But I think that with all these factors combined, whether it's on Iran or just in general, the Saudis are set to make a major announcement within the coming weeks about.
I think you're right about that, and then we should mention that I think Russia is going to be mediating
Yes, yes.
between. Yeah, so that's why I'm I mean, it's just in their best interest not to get into a conflict, and certainly not for Saudi Arabia to start a conflict.
No,
Um,
that's not what I was getting at. But
oh,
I
okay, I'm sorry.
yeah, again, they it does seem like that they are putting pressure, at least acquiescing to the U.S.'s desire to put pressure on Iran. But I would just say all these factors combined, the Saudis are
Yeah,
preparing some sort of major announcement or breakthrough on. Like I said, I can't give anything in particular. I would imagine it would probably have to do with oil prices or negotiations with Iran. But at this point, although they have a lot of the U.S. forces there, and although the Iranians have expressed frustration, I doubt that relations are going to regress too greatly between the two, unless there really is blood in the water and that the Iranian regime really is on the brink of collapse. And although they are trying a Maidan-style revolution in Iran right now, it still is in
yeah.
its early.
Bolton said that the rebels now, um, demonstrators now have guns.
Yeah, I saw that you had sent me that, and
Yeah.
So it is getting to the level where they are pulling out all their last stops when it comes to Iran because it's, like I said, a combination of the current, at least, appearance of weakness from Russia and the very quickly closing window on the Iranian issue when it comes between that, American capabilities in general, and their dynamic with Saudi Arabia and the rest of the nations in the region seeming to come to a more diplomatic or political solution. So they are pulling out all the last stops in order to try to affect, especially somebody like John Bolton and people who are in his camp, pulling out all the last stops they can in order to get that vaunted regime change in Iran.
Right, and this also comes on the heels of a something like a $40 billion gas and oil deal that is established now between Iran and Russia. Russia is going to develop oil and gas fields in Iran, and it's going to be feasible because, of course, there's now a trade route uh, from Russia all the way from St. Petersburg to the Caspian Sea, down the Caspian Sea into Iran, and then it's a short jaunt over to India. If they get Pakistan on board, and Pakistan has been like a very interesting country to watch because Imran Khan, there was an assassination attempt. He has come back. Um, I think he has such a support of the people that they will actually have to kill him to stop him.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
he is crucial because if he can get cooperation between, like, all he has to do is go on board, and there is no way for America to stop anything in that region, short of trying to invade it. And America cannot invade again the way it did with the Iraq Part Two. The other thing I think to keep in mind, right, is um, what worries America is the integration of Eurasia. That is what is happening right now. America spent 20 years in Afghanistan. If it really wanted to, it could have set up all kinds of mines. It could have set up an entire economy around that. That economy would have been directly responsible for, because of the minerals that Iran has, like cobalt, and many others that are very rare. The only other country with such rare minerals for the production of batteries and uh, electronics is Afghanistan in that region, right? If they wanted to, they could have done it, but they didn't. I don't know whether that was because they thought that China would go on board. Uh, I don't see how they could have believed that the last 7 years. Was 7 years then too late to begin that? The policy of the US right now basically is to cause chaos. Uh, they are not able to build up another country, and I think that might have to do because I think they see the writing on the wall that um, China. I mean, in purchasing power, China is already ahead of America. It already has more industrial capacity than America. And what is like, and it's not just China, because you're talking about the integration of all of Eurasia. It's much bigger than China. There's much bigger markets. So it's not all about, Chinese demographics, even though South Koreans and Japanese are disappearing faster than they are. China already has a very huge population. And I know the people who would like to see China fall apart soon, they're going to be disappointed. So I would say that even the Americans leaving behind all that military hardware was in hopes that it would help to destabilize Central Asia and therefore Eurasia, right? I mean, that was sort of the point of getting Russia to go in Afghanistan in the first place, because back in the 70s and 80s, Central Command for Russia was in Kazakhstan. That's where their satellites went up, their astronauts, their intelligence, their rocket industry was all developed there. So the hope was that they could destabilize Afghanistan. Afghanistan would go insane, and then that would spread into all the other stands, and then that would totally compromise Russia right in the center. Um, so I think that's an important thing to think about when we think about how Russia is working with Iran, how it wants to get China to begin better relationship, a better relationship with India. The relationship between China and Iran is good, and so far, um, China and India have not flared up the way I think a lot of people thought they would this year. Because I think they both understand what the bigger picture is.
Oh, absolutely. You haven't seen that flare up since I remember it was 2019, 2020 when it was just hand to hand combat on
That was
the.
crazy.
Yeah, that was. And wasn't there upwards like almost 100 casualties on
Something
like
like that, yeah.
altogether? It
They
was.
literally killed each other with their bare hands and metal rods.
Yeah, like they like rods and like and tree branches, like whatever they could get that wasn't like firearms or bladed weapons they were using on each other. So that was an interesting flare up that a lot of people thought was going to escalate into something much further. And as you were saying, I agree that India and China have found a greater understanding that although their issues do exist, there's far more to be gained than whatever current disputes exist between them.
Yeah.
And speaking of countries that have far more to gain than focusing on existing disputes, you have the Turkish gas hub project continuing once again.
Yeah.
And you have in Thrace, which is just on the European side of the Bosphorus Straits, is where the storage of the gas hub will be positioned. So that includes countries as disparate as, again, Israel, Russia, several Middle Eastern nations all coming together to turn Turkey into this gas hub. And as we had discussed in previous episode, that gives Turkey two valves which to leverage Europe. That is the migration valve, and that is the literal gas valve.
Yeah.
And that is put in a position where they have an outsized negotiating power on Europe, especially as the fuel dries up from Russia going into the winter. So that certainly will be an interesting situation to see it play out because at first it just looked like speculation that this gas hub project was even going to happen. But then week after week, it became something far more serious to the point where it's official. It's undeniable. There's not really anything that can undo this at this point. That Turkey has been given this outsized power and influence, and that they are now the gas hub of Eurasia, frankly. Whether that.
You brought up something really interesting, that there's two valves, the migration valve and the energy valve. But that reminded me of Ukraine, in that one of the things that the West is very worried about right now is with Russia bombing uh, the energy infrastructure of Ukraine, that as winter approaches, and it's colder there than it is here right now, in southern Canada and northeastern United States, that they're looking at anywhere between 700,000 to several million exiting out of Ukraine, and they're going to go into Europe because the Ukrainians don't want them to go to Russia. Remember, of all the countries, the one country that has received more Ukrainian refugees than anyone else is not Poland, it's Russia. Europe combined has received more, but if we're talking about single countries, Russia is well over 1 million. Uh, if there is a deal, the deal is um, we'll give you this, so you have like a diagonal line stretching from northern Lugansk to Kherson, the region, not the city, divided by the Dnieper. If you stop with the attacks on the energy infrastructure, then we don't have to deal with. I mean, I even saw some estimates like 8 million. Uh, and of course, Zelensky is pushing this because he thinks he's going to resolve this with more arms. Uh, I think they know very well that the country that really has the taps on Ukrainian exodus out of Ukraine is Russia, not Ukraine. So if there is a deal, that would be part of the deal.
Absolutely. And it will be interesting to see how all that plays out. And I just do have a few news items left for the show. So you have the expansion of BRICS, which we did touch on, and some of the news about Pakistan with Imran Khan that we touched on, but particularly the Brazilian elections. Now, I debated on whether I should even cover these or not because they seemed somewhat inconsequential. They're really, I mean, you have Bolsonaro who carries all the baggage of any Western right winger, and despite his more entertaining moments, and then you have Lula who resembles your average Latin American politician. I mean, the man ran for president from jail, so that should tell you all you need to know. But I did see something interesting almost immediately after the election that made me actually want to cover this. So, Lula proposes creating a Latin American common currency to, quote, free the continent from the US dollar. Now, we've seen in Europe what a common currency, what the negative side of common currency could be, and I don't think that it would be a good idea, just economics speaking, what I know about economics, for a common currency in Latin America. But the idea of wanting to be freed from the US dollar is what struck me. Now, I have a general background of Lula's political career, once again, more or less from the corrupt left wing politician, and he never really, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, somebody who knows more about Brazilian politics or him in particular, never struck me as anti American empire. And I this is even a bit of a surprising move because I figured after his jail time, after whatever, he would have come out and been just completely fine with the American system. In fact, there were reports that the Biden administration worked to help him win election over Bolsonaro. But now you have him coming out and saying this about the American dollar. And that can only signal further cooperation within BRICS. He was the president of Brazil when BRICS was founded as an organization, although it was a far different organization back then than it is today. But not that I'm going to say I support Lula because, once again, I really don't have any opinions on the politics of Brazil at all because, number one, I don't live in Brazil. Number two, it doesn't have really much impact outside of Brazil. I'm not saying that they're insignificant on the world stage, but it's far different than, say, an analysis of Russian, Chinese, or even many European countries' politics. It's just on a different level, and perhaps that's just an oversight on my part, but it's Latin American politics is kind of something in the rear view for me, if you couldn't tell based on our coverage on the show. But this statement changed my mind a bit on that, especially given the current state of BRICS and how it's expanding, and how not only is it expanding in number of members, but in its actual role as an organization. And although you have the debacle we had discussed in Ukraine at the beginning of the show, you still do have plenty of these nations that are divorcing itself from the current world order and participating in a more multipolar order. And while that could be undone by a Russian defeat in Ukraine, depending on how we want to define defeat, it is still a movement underway. And in my opinion, it still shows that while the American empire can shore itself up, it is approaching the end. And perhaps that's far too optimistic of a take on my end, depending on who you ask, but it is at a point where I don't see how many more stops they can pull out. One, Latin America, especially during the Cold War, was something solidly within America's grasp, with the exception of Cuba. If there was any whiff of disloyalty to American foreign policy interests, there was a coup there, there was some sort of uprising, there was some rectification of the situation. And say what you will about those individual cases, but it showed a far more effective United States that they could, in Chile, stage a coup, put Pinochet in power over whoever was elected, or intervene in any of these Latin American civil conflicts, or be able to put their guy in power when they needed him.
Mm.
But now you have, if you're to believe the reports about the Biden administration assisting Lula coming into power, them putting quote unquote their guy in the power, and one of the first thing he says is denouncing the US dollar and talking about how Latin America needs to be freed from it.
Yeah, Lula was responsible for bringing Brazil into BRICS, but that was in 2004 or 2005. And, there was a bit of a remake with him. He became more of like a neolib politician rather than like LARPing as this like more radical, like traditional left-wing politician. Like, it's something more like the authoritarian left of the mid-century, right? Um, there's arguments that he was thrown in jail for, the wrong reasons. Some people say it was for the right reasons. The thing is Brazil in many ways is very much like America because, for instance, um, he had Bolsonaro had these cars with advertisements plastered all over the car to vote for him. And then, like, the Supreme Court judged that they couldn't drive around, definitely could not drive around in various regions. So that was stopped. Then there were radio ads that were stopped. So you're getting the picture like Bolsonaro's term in office was very much like Trump's term in office. Constant everyday pressure. He goes to visit and do, to deal with flooding in the Amazon. Well, they don't focus on that. They focus on he's a genocidal maniac because he was light on COVID. So it's what you can never win. And um, if Brazil had an electoral college the way the U.S. does, Bolsonaro would have won handedly. And it is amazing that he lost only by a small amount. There are still protests right now. It is still, uncertain what is going to happen in Brazil. Now, he said that he would like lay down his life rather than like leave office. And of course, he told them like, listen, just go home. They didn't say stop protesting, but he said the highways are dangerous or something to that effect. Look, I don't want to cover him for him. I don't get the sense that he like Trump. I get the sense that he like Trump is not the guy that's going to cross the Rubicon, right? And moreover, you've got that northeastern part of Brazil that isn't white. Ironically, it's also the place where the first Brazilian settlers settled, and they mixed with the population there, and then the African population that came over. That population depends on handouts. They're economically depressed. They're not like the parts of South Eastern Brazil and Central South Brazil. And it's the same dynamic. It's the same dynamic that you see happening all over the West. It's the same dynamic. You see it here in Canada as well, but it's even more so in the US. And it will be it's the same in the UK. It's turning into the same kind of scenario. They have their privileged classes and they look after them. And they have an entire media that is absolutely dedicated to supporting this agenda. But you also have the Supreme Court, right? Um, like ultimately, if you if you are going to work within democracy, you're going to lose. You have to scrap democracy.
Oh, it's indisputable at this point, and I mean, even if you want to take a more particular approach to that, you'll notice that the most illiberal or rightist governments always come from parliamentary systems, whether that is in Hungary, whether that is in, forgive me for using this example, Poland, that systems where the right wing actually gets elected are usually parliamentary systems with proportional representation. Popular vote is just it's an open door for the left to come into power, and I think that's indisputable. And like I said, not to defend the democratic system at this point because I think we all understand the problems there, but it, it it is just something you're going to do away with, and the more you can chip away at it, the better. And I mean, frankly, I'm not surprised at all by the outcome in Brazil. I figured that Lula was going to pull it off and that Bolsonaro was going to be a flash in the pan. And I mean, that's really all I can say about it.
Hmm.
But that's all I had for this week, unless I left out any items that you have.
No, I that's it for me.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode of the War Report. We will see you on the next episode, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.